the most important events that took place during the previous 12 hours. We have a lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first, we're going to talk about Ukraine and Zelensky because during the previous hours he made very interesting statements. Zelensky, Russia plans to capture Odessa and then to reach the border with Moldova and Romania. Zelensky called Odessa the key to the security of the southeastern Europe. Putin does not want to end the war. He believes that he can dominate his allies and remain politically alive. Our job is to put Russia in a position where they will seek peace and political survival through non-military means. Ukraine is developing new types of drones to protect energy. Another important piece of news is that the West demands that Ukraine mobilize from the age of 18. Then they will impose sanctions against the Russian Federation. But Zelensky will not do this. You know that the most interesting thing is that we start receiving more and more updates about the war in 2026. So nobody says that the special military operation will be finished in 2025 or by the end of the 2025. Now we start receiving more and more updates that this war will be prolonged for the next year, and most likely during the next year, the Ukraine will be forced to start mobilization among age of 18s, and most likely the next year, the European Union and the Western countries will introduce additional or impose additional sanctions against Russia. And most likely the next year is going to be decisive year in the special military operation, when most likely the Russians would be able to get the river of Dnipro and to start offensive operation in the Odessa region. Furthermore, these updates were confirmed not just by Zelensky and different Western media. For example, during the previous 24 hours, the president of the Russian Federation made lots of very interesting statements. For example, Putin demanded that the bases and airfields be prepared in advance for new weapon systems so that they are not installed in an open field. So most likely the Russians are talking about their aircrafts of the next generations, that the Russians most likely are going to begin production, massive production by the end of 2025, and obviously this can change the face of the special military operation. Furthermore, the president of the Russian Federation reported that the Russians and Russian army must be improved significantly during the next days and next months. So the Russians are preparing for something huge in 2026, and the Russians are doing everything they can with the purpose to have this advantage and to have this complete and significant superiority in every single sphere in the special military operation. So once again, nobody is waiting for the end of the war in this year. Most likely the war will be prolonged for the next year as well. Now let's talk about the situation on the ground, and first let's talk about the situation in the Sumy direction, where the Russians continue their offensive operation. During the previous 24 hours, as you can see, and during the previous night, we got additional geolocations that were published by the Ukrainian sources, and we have 4 icons, as you can see, 4 geolocations that took place on the line between the settlements of Alexeyevka and Andreevka. This video was published by the Ukrainians. The Ukraine FPV drone operators shared with this video, where we can see lots of strikes, lots of attacks on Russian positions in this area. There are lots of episodes once again, and 4 of them were geolocated. 2 of them took place in the vicinity of the settlement of Kondratovka, and 2 of them took place on the line between Andreevka and Alexeyevka. And based on this video, we have adjusted the map. I'll remind you that these territories used to be considered as a gray zone or contested area, and now we have proofs that the Russians managed to secure this territory and that the Russians continue offensive operation in the direction of the second defense layer in this area. Furthermore, we got several reports from the settlement of Yunakiivka, and these reports were published by the Ukrainian sources. The situation in the Yunakiivka area is extremely difficult. Yes, Ukrainian soldiers recently pushed the Russian armed forces almost from the center of the village, so the Ukrainians are saying that they managed to force the Russians to fall back, but the general conditions for defense have not improved since then. So the Ukrainians at the same time confirmed that most likely sooner or later they would be forced to fall back from this territory. But anyway, despite the fact that Ukrainians sooner or later would be forced to fall back, as for now they managed to stabilize the situation and to force the Russians to leave the settlement. And I would like to remind you that currently the Russians decided to change their tactics, not to attack the settlement of Yunakiivka from the north. Now the Russians decided to outflank the settlement of Yunakiivka from the east and from the southeast, trying to get for as close as possible to the main supply lines and to cut the contingent of Yunakiivka from supply and support from the mainland. But obviously this will take probably probably days or maybe weeks to finish this operation. So most likely the Russians on the western flank are not going to wait for the end of the battle for the settlement of Yunakivka, and the Russians will continue further in the southern direction towards the settlements of Khotin and Pisarevka. Probably this can lead to some unpredictable consequences for Ukrainian positions and their defense in the entire region. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Konstantinovka direction, where the Russians continue their offensive operation. During the previous 24 hours, during the previous night, we haven't received much, just interesting updates in the area of Dnipro. Today, several neutral mappers reported that the Ukrainians counterattacked the central part of the village, and as a result of counteroffensive, the Ukrainians managed to restore control over the central part of the settlement, and the Russians were forced to fall back. As for now, without any proofs that can confirm this, without any videos. Furthermore, from the sea direction, we continue receiving lots of videos how the Russians were bombing and attacking Ukraine positions, trying to destroy as many as possible soldiers of the armed forces of Ukraine for further offensive operation that is going to take place in the very near future. We're talking about the final offensive in the Kliban-Byksky pocket.
I stormens hjerte, hvor legender bliver født, en ny kraft vågen.
Now let's talk about N32 road. Today several pro-Russian resources published this video, and in this video we can see probably the final moments of the battle for the settlement of Mirne. In this video we can see on the first episode and the first seconds of this video how Russians destroyed Ukrainian drone, and then we can see two Russian soldiers that established the Russian flag on a building on the territory of the central part of the village of Mirne. So based on this video, most of the mappers adjusted their maps, adding the central part of Mirne and the complete Russian control. I would like to remind you that these territories used to be considered as a gray zone or contested area, and now we have proofs that the Russians secured at least 60 or even 70% of the settlement. Several pro-Russian resources colored the village of Mirne completely in Russian favor. So we are waiting for another report of the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation. Maybe today they will confirm this information. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the South Donetsk direction and in the Dnipropetrovsk direction, where the Russians continue their offensive operation. And the most important updates are coming from the line between the settlements of Alexeyevka and Novoukrainka. And this is the most important video that was published during the previous 24 hours. And in this video we can see how the clashes were taking place for the settlement of Alexeyevka and for the entire line. In this video we can see how the Russians were bombing and attacking Ukrainian positions. We can see lots of explosions. We can see FPV drone attacks on Ukrainian vehicles. And in the final part of this video, we can see how Russians established and raised their flag. And in this very moment, we can see how the units of 114th Brigade of the Armed Forces of the Russian Federation raised their flag in the most western part of this area. So according to this video, we came to the conclusion that some territories were taken by the Russian control. So this is exactly the moment, and this is exactly the place where the Russians raised their flag. And this is very important because if you follow different mappers and different military experts, you would be surprised by every single mapper adjusted their own maps differently. So one sources adjusted just the southern part, several mappers adjusted the line between Alexeyevka and Novoukrainka. So why is this happening? I would like to explain to you so you will have better understanding of the situation. And to understand why have we colored this territory and once somebody else colored this territory different way, first of all, we need to rewind updates for the previous day by the 11th of June of 2025. And this is the situation that we saw yesterday. And I would like to remind you that yesterday the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation reported, and they made two very interesting reports. The first one was that the Group of Forces Center managed to consolidate additional forces along the border with the Dnipropetrovsk Oblast, and that the Russians continue offensive from the Group of Forces Center. And yesterday, for the first time since the beginning of the battle for this direction, the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation also added that the Group of Forces East, or the Group of Forces Vostok, managed to cross the border as well, and they began consolidation in this area as well. And most of the mappers came to conclusion that the Russians of the group of forces East attacked the settlement of Novoukrainka using these roads of attack. And yesterday we had lots of adjustments on the map on different mappers using exactly this way. So once again, this is the situation by the end of the 10th of June of 2025. This is the situation by the end of the 11th of June of 2025. And most of the mappers adjusted their maps exactly this way based on the report that was published by the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation. And at the same time, during the same day, we got videos from the settlements of Alexeyevka, where the units of the 114th Brigade established almost complete control over the settlement. We had a lot of episodes where the Russians were raising their flags on the territory of this village. And also yesterday we discussed that there is a river of Volcha. This is the river, and this is exactly where we are talking about. And according to information we have, this river, the river of Volcha, is something like a border between two zones of responsibilities, between the group of forces Vostok East or the group of forces Center. So everything to the south of the river is the group of forces East responsibilities, everything to the north is the group of forces Center responsibilities. And the brigades, and the 114th Brigade is the brigade that is fighting on the side of the group of forces Center. So this is very important. And today we got this video from, let's say, western outskirts of Novoukrainka, where Russian soldiers raised their flags. And this flag, as you can see, was established by the 114th Brigade, which means that this brigade was attacking from the east in the western direction. So when talking about previous updates, this brigade was attacking in this direction because maybe they had chances to attack from the southern direction using this road, but this is the road of the group of forces east of any group of forces. So that is why most of the mappers adjusted their maps between the lines of Alexeyevka, Zelenokut, and Novoukrainka like this way, because the flag was established by 114th Brigade, and this brigade is attacking from the east in the western direction. But once again, since all these videos were published by the Russian sources, we haven't received anything that can confirm Russian control, neither Russian control over the settlements of Zelenokut nor the settlements of Novoukrainka, nor that the Russian soldiers are there. So this is the most important. Of course, today, the 12th of June of 2025, is a very important day because today we are waiting additional or another report from the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation, where the Russians would confirm complete control over Alexeyevka, Zelenokut, Novoukrainka. If this doesn't happen, most likely most of the mappers would be forced to adjust their maps back, showing Novoukrainka and Zelenokut as areas under complete Ukrainian control. And most likely the Russians were attacking through the settlement of Bogatyr using these roads of attack. This is exactly the area where the Russians crossed the river of Volcha, and this is exactly the way how the Russians established their flags. So the situation is very complicated, but telling the truth, sometimes maybe doesn't matter, because we see that the Russians continue offensive, and now it's clear that the next thing that the Russians are tasked for is to cut this pocket between the villages of Alexeyevka, Zelenokut, Novoukrainka, and Goryokhova. Furthermore, according to several pro-Russian mappers, as a result of offensive operation, the settlement of Goryokhova was also captured by the Russians by the morning of the 12th of June of 2025. So we think that we can start counting days before this pocket collapses completely, and before the Russians establish complete control over this territory. At the same time, the Russians continue their offensive in the direction of the settlement of Kamar, and according to information we have, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to improve their positions around the village without improving of their positions on the territory of the settlement itself. Now we see that the Russians control N15 highway, and the Russians are planning to move further, most likely in the northwestern direction, with the purpose to cut the settlement of Kamar from the north as well. I would like to remind you that Ukrainians, since the beginning of June, have destroyed every single bridge in this area between Kamar and the mainland. Ukrainians on the territory of the settlement are completely cut off from supply and support, and if the Russians are able to outflank the village from the northeast and from the north, this will lead to complete collapse of Ukrainian positions there, and the Ukrainians on the territory of Kamar would be caught in cauldron. So this is the situation on this direction. When talking about the Zaporozhye area during the previous 24 hours, we haven't received anything special. The Russians were bombing and attacking Ukrainian positions around the village of the settlement of Gulyai-Polya, but without any changes on the ground. And that's it for the short video. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon.